The water was a black, silent press. Anya Sharma hung suspended in the void of the training tank, lungs burning with a controlled, familiar fire. Above, the emergency lights were off, simulating a total power failure in a submerged vessel. Below, only the faint phosphorescent markers of the escape hatch offered a ghost of a path. Her gauge was dark. Her rebreather was, for the purpose of the drill, compromised. She was just a body, a will, and a finite store of oxygen in her blood. The pressure on her eardrums was a dull, constant reminder of her depth. The cold seeped through the seals of her wetsuit, a patient thief stealing warmth from her limbs. She did not fight it. She observed it. She let the seconds stretch, each one a bead on a long, invisible string. Her mind was not a place of panic, but a quiet, sterile room where she analyzed data, the rate of ache in her chest, the faint tingling in her fingertips, the rhythmic pulse thudding in her neck. This was where control lived, not in the absence of fear, but in its precise and ruthless management. A lesser trainee would be clawing for the surface, driven by the primal scream of their drowning hindbrain. Anya listened to that scream, acknowledged it, and then filed it away. It was useless information. Her focus was on the mission: remain at depth until the signal, locate the hatch by touch and memory, and ascend at a rate that would not rupture her lungs. The burn intensified, shifting from a dull ache to a sharp, stabbing demand. Her diaphragm spasmed, a desperate, involuntary plea. She held. She remained perfectly still, conserving every molecule of energy. Her world had shrunk to the space inside her own skin. Then, a low, resonant clang echoed through the water, vibrating in the bones of her skull. The signal. Release. She exhaled a thin, controlled stream of bubbles, the silver trail rising into the oppressive dark. Her movements were fluid, economical, no wasted effort. One hand trailed along the smooth, cold wall of the tank, her fingers mapping the surface for the familiar rivets that bracketed the hatch. Her other arm remained tucked against her body, a study in hydrodynamic efficiency. Her fins propelled her with slow, powerful strokes, her ankles flexing with practiced ease. She found the latch, a heavy, grooved wheel. Her gloved fingers, numb with cold, locked onto it. She applied steady, even pressure, using the strength of her core and back, not just her arms. The wheel turned with a gritty protest. The hatch swung open into the deeper blackness of the escape tube. She pushed through, her body a calibrated instrument performing its function. This was her language, the grammar of pressure and time, the syntax of controlled violence and quiet survival. This was the only argument that mattered. Prove you belong here. The mess hall at Naval Special Warfare Center Coronado buzzed with the grating energy of young men overflowing with testosterone and ambition. It was a room of broad shoulders, sharp jawlines, and voices that defaulted to a confident boom. They were candidates, the best of the best from other elite units, all vying for a place in the glorious, brutal fraternity of the SEALs. They moved in packs, their laughter loud, their posture a constant, unspoken challenge to one another. Anya sat alone at a small table in the corner, meticulously disassembling her dive computer. The delicate components lay on a clean cloth in perfect order, a miniature city of circuits and seals. She worked with the focused intensity of a watchmaker, her expression neutral, her presence a quiet island in a sea of noise. She was not one of them. Her path here had been different, a specialized pipeline for a new kind of operator. But to the candidates, she was an anomaly, an unwelcome variable in their rigid masculine equation. They saw her smaller frame, her quiet demeanor, and their minds, trained to assess threats and weaknesses, filed her under other. Harmless, or worse, a political statement. A few tables away, a candidate named Graves held court. He was built like a draft horse, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and a voice that scraped like gravel. His audience, a half-dozen other trainees, hung on his words, their faces reflecting his own casual arrogance. His eyes scanned the room and landed on Anya. A slow, condescending smirk spread across his face. "Look at that," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Someone's doll got lost on the way to the tea party." His friends snickered. The sound was a low, rumbling thing, meant to be overheard. Anya didn't look up. She continued to clean a small O-ring with a soft bristled brush, her movements precise and unhurried. The insult was a stone thrown into a still pond. She simply chose not to be the water that rippled. In another corner, leaning against the wall with a cup of black coffee, stood Master Chief Petty Officer Thorne. He was a relic from a different era of the teams, a man whose face was a roadmap of hard-won experience. He saw everything and said little. His gaze drifted from Graves's preening display to Anya's focused work. He saw the cheap posturing, and he saw the quiet discipline. He took a slow sip of his coffee, his expression unreadable. Graves, emboldened by her lack of reaction, pushed his chair back and stood. He and his cohort began to move, their path a deliberate interception course with Anya's table. The ambient noise of the mess hall seemed to dip slightly as others sensed the shift in social gravity. This was a test, a public assertion of the established order. The pack was about to circle a perceived outsider. Anya continued her work, her breathing steady. She could feel their approach, the subtle change in the air pressure, the heavy tread of their boots on the linoleum floor. She was cataloging their positions, their postures, their likely intent. The situation was simple, the variables clear. They were coming to see if she would break. Graves loomed over her table, blocking the fluorescent light. His shadow fell across the neatly arranged components of her dive computer. He placed his big, calloused hands flat on her table, leaning in, his voice a low, mocking drawl. "You know, we have armorers to clean our gear. You don't have to get your hands dirty." His cronies fanned out behind him, forming a loose, intimidating semicircle. They were a wall of muscle and contempt. One of them, a lean candidate named Miller, hung back slightly, his expression more curious than hostile. Anya finished cleaning the O-ring and carefully placed it back in its housing. Only then did she lift her head, her eyes meeting Graves's. Her gaze was not fearful or angry. It was flat, analytical, like a lens focusing on an object of study. "This is my personal computer," she said, her voice calm and even. "I prefer to maintain it myself." Her lack of deference seemed to agitate him. He wanted a reaction, a flinch, a stammer, a flash of anger. He was getting nothing but placid, infuriating competence. He reached out, his finger jabbing toward the most complex part of the assembly, the central processing unit. "What happens if you put this little doohickey in backwards?" he sneered. His finger was about to touch the sensitive electronic component. It was a deliberate, calculated breach of etiquette. You do not touch another operator's weapon, you do not touch their comms, and you do not touch their dive computer. It was a line. "Don't," she said. The word was not a plea. It was a command, delivered with the quiet authority of a bomb disposal technician telling someone not to press a button. It was so devoid of emotion that it momentarily froze him. His finger hovered an inch from the circuit board. The air grew thick with tension. Master Chief Thorne, still in his corner, straightened up slightly. He had seen this 1,000 times, the insecure buck trying to establish dominance through intimidation. He watched Anya, curious to see how she would de-escalate or escalate the encounter. Graves, recovering from his surprise, let out a short, ugly laugh. He was committed now, his pride on the line in front of his audience. Or what, he challenged, pushing the boundaries. He decided to touch it, a final act of disrespect. As his fingertip began its descent, Anya moved. It wasn't a strike, it wasn't even aggressive. Her hand, which had been resting on the table, shot out and gently cupped his wrist. Her thumb found the radial nerve cluster on the inside of his forearm. She applied a small, almost imperceptible amount of pressure. It was not a pain compliance hold. It was a simple biomechanical statement. I am here, I am in control of this space. An electric jolt, sharp and surprising, shot up Graves's arm. His muscles contracted involuntarily. His hand jerked back as if he had touched a live wire. He stared at her, his face a mask of shock and confusion. She hadn't hurt him, not really. She had simply demonstrated a perfect understanding of human anatomy and leverage. She had used his own body against him with the efficiency of a surgeon. Her hand retracted, returning to its place beside her computer. "It's a sensitive piece of equipment," she said, her tone unchanged, as if explaining a simple fact to a child. The recruits behind Graves were silent, their smirks gone. They had expected a shouting match or a flustered retreat. They had just witnessed a silent, definitive shutdown. Miller's eyes widened slightly. He had felt the energy shift, the brief intense moment when control had been asserted and won without a single raised voice. It was the most unnerving thing he had seen all week. Graves rubbed his wrist, his face flushing with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. He had been publicly neutered, and he knew it. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He had brought a club to a battle of scalpels, and he had lost before he even understood the fight. Master Chief Thorne decided the lesson needed a formal postscript. He pushed himself off the wall and walked toward the tense tableau, his boots making a soft, rhythmic sound on the floor. His arrival broke the spell. Graves and his crew stiffened, their postures shifting from aggressive to deferential. "Everything all right over here, Candidate Graves?" Thorne's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades of command. Graves, flustered, straightened up. "Yes, Master Chief. Just welcoming the new addition." The lie was thin and clumsy. Thorne's eyes, the color of faded sea ice, flickered from Graves's face to Anya's calm expression and then to the dive computer on the table. He ignored the lie completely. "Good. Since you're all so interested in equipment maintenance, let's have a little practical exercise." He walked over to a nearby training locker and pulled out a coil of 1-inch nylon rope and 2 steel carabiners. He tossed them onto the table next to Anya's gear. They landed with a heavy clatter. "Rescue Not Evolution," Thorne announced to the assembled group. "Standard bowline on a bite tied one-handed behind the back in under 10 seconds. Standard for high-angle rescue and vessel-to-vessel transfer in rough seas. Graves, you're first." A murmur went through the small crowd. It was a notoriously difficult knot, a tangle of loops and passes that was hard enough to master with 2 hands in a clear line of sight. One-handed behind the back was a display of pure muscle memory and spatial awareness. It was a show-off knot, but one with deadly serious applications. Graves paled slightly, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Yes, Master Chief." He took the rope. He turned his back, fumbling with the thick, stiff line behind him. The seconds ticked by. 10. 15. He grunted with effort and frustration. 20. He turned around, his face slick with sweat, holding up a mangled mess of rope that looked more like a snarl than a knot. "Having trouble?" Thorne asked, his tone dangerously neutral. "No, Master Chief, just a stiff rope." Thorne took the rope from him. He didn't look at Anya. He simply held the rope out in her general direction. "Sharma, your turn." Anya stood. She took the rope, her fingers assessing its texture and stiffness. She turned her back to the table, holding the rope in her right hand. She took one deep, centering breath. Thorne clicked his stopwatch. Anya's hand moved behind her back. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. Her movements were a blur of fluid, economical motion, her fingers dancing with the rope. It was like watching a concert pianist's hands, each digit acting with independent, trained intelligence. A series of quick, precise twists and tucks, a final, sharp pull to seat the knot. She turned around and presented the result to Thorne. It was a perfect bowline on a bite, the loops clean, the knot dressed and tight. It was a picture from a training manual. Thorne glanced at his stopwatch. 6 seconds. He looked up from the watch, his gaze finally meeting hers directly. For the first time, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Not approval, not yet, but acknowledgement. He then looked at Graves and the other recruits. Their faces were a mixture of disbelief and grudging admiration. They had just witnessed something that could not be dismissed. Brute strength and loud talk were the currency of their world. They had just been shown a different kind of power, quiet, flawless, undeniable precision. Miller stared at the perfect knot in her hand, then at his own hands, as if seeing them for the first time. He had been practicing that same knot for weeks and could barely tie it with 2 hands in 30 seconds. The demonstration was over. Thorne took the rope from Anya. "Dismissed," he said, his voice flat. Graves and his crew shuffled away, the swagger gone from their steps. They had come to intimidate and had left educated. Anya sat back down at her table and calmly began to reassemble her dive computer, the quiet master of her own small, orderly world. The exercise was a full mission profile, a clandestine insertion onto a hostile coast. 2 rigid-hull inflatable boats, or RHIBs, would launch from a transport vessel 10 miles offshore, navigate through a treacherous channel known as the Devil's Teeth, and land a small reconnaissance team. The mission was scheduled for the dead of night, with a forecast of calm seas and light cloud cover. Command had other ideas. They had received an updated weather report, a fast-moving, unseasonal squall line building far out to sea. Standard procedure would be to scrub the mission. Instead, the training cadre saw an opportunity. They would let the candidates launch, withholding the updated forecast. They wanted to see how the teams would react when the plan inevitably fell apart. It heated for us, a classic stress test designed to separate the operators from the aspirants. Anya was assigned to Alpha Boat, commanded by Graves. When the assignment was read out, Graves shot her a look of pure venom. He saw it as a deliberate slight, a babysitting assignment. His crew, including Miller, felt the tension. The pre-launch checks were terse and professional, but the animosity simmered just beneath the surface. Anya ignored it. She focused on her tasks, checking the comms gear, verifying the GPS waypoints, securing her equipment. She moved with a quiet efficiency that seemed to irritate Graves even more. As they loaded onto the black low-profile RHIB, the sea was deceptively calm, a sheet of dark glass under a sliver of moon. The air was heavy, humid, and still. Too still. Anya scanned the horizon. There were no stars visible to the west, just a solid, impenetrable bank of blackness that was slowly swallowing the sky. She checked the boat's barometer. It had dropped 6 millibars in the last hour, a steep, alarming gradient. "Pressure's falling fast," she said to Graves, her voice low and factual. "There's a storm coming." Graves, busy trying to project an aura of confident command, scoffed. "Medoc said clear skies. Stick to your comms, Sharma. Let me handle the boat." Miller, overhearing the exchange, glanced from the barometer to the western sky. He felt a knot of unease tighten in his stomach. The instructors had warned them about complacency, about trusting the forecast over what their own eyes were telling them. The 2 RHIBs cast off, their engines a low, powerful rumble in the night. They sped across the water, 2 dark arrows aimed at the distant shore. For the first 30 minutes, everything went according to plan. The boats kept formation, the sea remained calm. Then, the first sign of trouble arrived. A long, oily swell, impossibly large for the current conditions, rolled under them. Then, another and another. The boat began to pitch and yaw in the growing troughs. The wind picked up, a low moan that quickly escalated to a sharp whistle. The blackness to the west was no longer on the horizon. It was on top of them. A curtain of rain, thick as concrete, slammed into them, driven by a savage, gusting wind. The world dissolved into a chaos of roaring wind, thrashing water, and impenetrable darkness. The mission was over. The fight for survival had just begun. The storm hit them with the force of a physical blow. The sea, moments before a calm plain, erupted into a maelstrom of jagged peaks and deep, sucking valleys of black water. The RHIB, designed for speed and stealth, was now a toy in the grip of a furious giant. Waves crashed over the bow, a relentless barrage of freezing salt water that felt like being hit with buckets of ice. Visibility dropped to 0. The only light came from the green glow of the GPS screen and the brief, terrifying flashes of lightning that illuminated a world of churning, monstrous waves. Graves gripped the helm, his knuckles white. He was fighting the sea, trying to force the boat through the waves with brute force, turning the bow directly into each oncoming crest. It was the textbook response, but the waves were too steep, too chaotic. The boat would climb a near-vertical wall of water, hang precariously at its peak, and then slam down into the trough with a bone-jarring impact that threatened to shatter the hull. "Hold on!" he screamed over the roar of the wind and engine, his voice thin and ragged. The other men were clinging to the safety lines, their faces pale masks of fear and seasickness. A particularly violent impact sent a shockwave through the boat. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. In the sudden terrifying silence that followed, broken only by the howl of the wind, a wave crashed over the side, flooding the deck and swamping the electronics console. The GPS screen flickered and went dark. A shower of sparks erupted from the comms unit, followed by the acrid smell of burnt wiring. They were dead in the water. No power, no navigation, no communication. They were blind, adrift, and utterly alone in the heart of the storm. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. "Get the engine started," Graves yelled at one of the men, his voice cracking. "I can't. It's flooded." Another shouted back. "Where's Bravo boat?" someone else cried out. They were lost. The disciplined team of a few minutes ago had devolved into a collection of terrified individuals. Graves was frozen, his mind unable to process the speed and totality of the system failure. His authority, built on the fragile scaffolding of a controlled training environment, crumbled in the face of true chaos. He had no answers. He just kept staring at the dead console as if willing it back to life. Anya, wedged in the stern to keep a low center of gravity, remained preternaturally calm. She had sealed her personal gear in a dry bag before the storm hit. While the others were shouting, she was working. She had already deployed the sea anchor, a small drogue parachute that would keep their bow pointed into the waves and prevent them from capsizing. Her movements were sure and steady, a small point of order in the heart of chaos. She pulled a small storm-proof case from her bag. Inside was a lensatic compass and a red-lensed headlamp. She wasn't panicking. She was adapting. She was solving the problem. Anya clipped the headlamp to her gear, its dim red light cutting a small, stable circle in the maelstrom. It was enough to see the faces of the other men, their eyes wide with fear. She saw Miller, his teeth chattering from cold and shock, but his gaze was fixed on her, watchful. He had seen her competence before, and in the absence of any other leadership, he was looking to her. She didn't shout. She didn't declare herself in charge. She simply began to issue quiet, logical instructions. "Miller, check the emergency beacon. Make sure it's secure and ready to activate on my signal." The order was simple, direct, and actionable. It gave him a task, a purpose, and it cut through the fog of his fear. He nodded, scrambling to the small, watertight case containing the beacon. "Davis," she said to another man, "start bailing. Use the helmets. We need to get this water out before we lose buoyancy." Davis, who had been frozen in place, immediately started scooping water out of the flooded deck. The simple, physical act seemed to ground him. Graves, seeing his authority evaporate, finally snapped out of his stupor. "I'm in command here, Sharma. I give the orders." Anya turned her head slowly, the red light illuminating her face. It was a calm, impassive mask. "The boat is taking on water. The engine is dead and we are adrift in a gale," she stated, her voice cutting through the wind. "Your orders got us here. My instructions will get us out. Now, your body weight is high. You're making us top-heavy. Get down on the deck and help Davis bail." It was a brutal, direct dismantling of his authority, but it was based on undeniable physics and fact. There was no ego in her voice, only a cold assessment of the tactical reality. Graves stared at her, his mouth opening and closing. He looked to his men for support, but they were already following her lead. Miller was giving her a thumbs up from the bow. The beacon was secure. Davis was bailing with frantic energy. In that moment, Graves ceased to be their leader. He was just another passenger on a boat being saved by someone who knew what she was doing. Defeated, he slumped to the deck and began to scoop water with his hands, his movements sullen and clumsy. Anya turned her attention back to the larger problem: survival. She held the compass in her hand, shielding it from the wind, trying to get a bearing in the violent pitching of the boat. She knew from their last known position that land was to the east. The wind was driving them northeast. If they could just survive the storm, they would likely make landfall somewhere. But survival was the immediate challenge. She organized the men into a routine: 2 bailing, 2 on lookout, 2 resting, rotating every 15 minutes to combat exhaustion and hypothermia. She had them huddled together for warmth. She was the calm, rational center around which the broken pieces of the team slowly began to reform. She was not their commander by rank, but she had become their leader by sheer, undeniable competence. The long night wore on, a seemingly endless cycle of fear, cold, and effort, all of it orchestrated by her quiet, steady voice in the dark. The storm broke with the dawn, the wind eased, the rain subsided, and the churning sea slowly settled into a heavy, rolling swell. The sky was a bruised purple and gray. In the distance, a dark, jagged line on the horizon resolved into a coastline. It wasn't the gentle, sandy beach of their mission objective. It was a forbidding stretch of rock and sheer cliffs. But it was land. "Paddle," Anya commanded. They had lost one of the two emergency paddles, but they used the remaining one, along with pieces of broken equipment and their bare hands, to slowly, painstakingly propel the waterlogged boat toward the shore. They were all exhausted, soaked, and freezing, but they were alive, and they had a purpose. They found a small, protected cove, a sliver of gravelly beach nestled between towering rock formations. The landing was rough. The surf pushed them onto the rocks, further damaging the already battered RHIB. One of the recruits, a young man named Peterson, slipped on a slick rock and went down hard. A sharp crack echoed in the quiet cove. He cried out, clutching his leg. His ankle was bent at an unnatural angle. Graves, his ego already in tatters, saw this as his chance to reassert himself. He scrambled over to Peterson, puffing out his chest. "All right, son, let's get you up. Shake it off. We need to move." He grabbed Peterson's arm to haul him to his feet. "Stop!" Anya's voice was sharp, cutting through the air. She was already kneeling beside Peterson, her hands gently probing the injured leg. "He's not moving. You'll cause a compound fracture." She looked up at Graves, her eyes cold. "He needs a splint and he needs to be kept warm. He's showing signs of shock." Graves, once again undermined by her competence, flushed with anger. His failure during the storm, his loss of command, his public humiliation, it all coalesced into a single point of rage directed at her. This was his breaking point. "I've had enough of you," he snarled, his voice low and shaking with fury. He took a step toward her, his fists clenched. "You think you're in charge? You're nothing. You're a box-ticking exercise. This is my team, and you've been undermining me since we left." Miller and the others stepped back, sensing the imminent explosion. They were on a desolate shore, miles from help, and their command structure was about to tear itself apart. "This isn't about you, Graves," Anya said, her voice remaining level. She did not rise to meet his aggression. She remained focused on her patient. "This is about getting him and the rest of us out of here alive." Her calm dismissal of his tirade was the final spark. With a roar of frustration, Graves lunged at her. He wasn't trying to intimidate her anymore. He was trying to hurt her. His big frame moved with surprising speed, his hands reaching for her, intending to throw her aside. The attack was clumsy, driven by rage rather than technique. Graves lunged forward, leading with his upper body, his balance compromised. Anya, still in a low crouch next to the injured Peterson, didn't try to meet his force with her own. That would be a losing battle. Instead, she moved with the attack, a principle as core to her training as breathing. As his hands reached for her shoulders, she shifted her weight onto her back foot, rotating her hips. Her left hand came up, not to block, but to guide. She caught his right wrist, her fingers locking over the joint. At the same time, her right hand pressed firmly against the back of his triceps, just above the elbow. It was a subtle, almost gentle redirection. Graves, expecting resistance, found none. His own momentum, now guided by Anya, carried him forward and past her. His center of gravity was already too far forward, and the pressure she applied to his elbow and wrist hyperextended the joint just enough to disrupt his balance completely. He stumbled, a surprised grunt escaping his lips, and pitched forward onto the gravelly beach. He landed hard, the air knocked out of him. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. It was so efficient, so devoid of violence, that it looked like he had simply tripped over her. But Miller and the others, who had been watching closely, saw the quiet, deliberate mechanics of the move. They saw the pivot, the wrist control, the subtle application of leverage. It was a perfect demonstration of using an opponent's strength and aggression against them. Graves pushed himself up, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. He had been thrown to the ground by a woman half his size, without her even standing up. Humiliation burned hotter than his anger. He scrambled to his feet and charged again, this time with a wild, swinging punch aimed at her head. Anya rose to her feet in a single, fluid motion. She didn't retreat. She stepped into the attack, closing the distance. The punch, designed for range, lost its power. Her left arm moved inside his swing, parrying his forearm and deflecting the blow safely past her head. Her right hand simultaneously shot forward, not as a fist, but with her fingers extended and rigid. She didn't strike his face or throat. She struck the brachial plexus origin point in his shoulder, the nerve bundle where the neck meets the collarbone. Her aim was precise, the strike sharp and focused, An explosion of white-hot, paralyzing pain shot down Graves's arm. His entire limb went numb and useless, hanging limply at his side. The shock of it short-circuited his brain. He gasped, his eyes wide with pain and shock, and staggered backward, clutching his deadened arm. He was done. The fight, such as it was over. Anya had not taunted him. She had not gloated. She had simply neutralized the threat with the minimum necessary force. She took a half-step back, her posture returning to a neutral, ready state. Her breathing was even, her expression unchanged. She looked at the other men, her gaze sweeping over them. "Is anyone else going to be a problem?" she asked, her voice calm and steady. There was a stunned silence, broken only by the sound of the waves on the shore, and Peterson's quiet moans of pain. Miller was the first to shake his head. "No, ma'am," he said, the honorific coming out naturally, without thought. The others mumbled their agreement, their eyes wide with a new, profound, and slightly fearful respect. The challenge was over. Authority had been settled not by rank or volume, but by a demonstration of superior skill so absolute it left no room for argument. Anya nodded once, then immediately turned and knelt back down beside Peterson. "Miller," she said, her voice all business again, "find me 2 straight, sturdy pieces of driftwood and tear strips from your t-shirt. We're setting his ankle." Hours crawled by. Anya directed the construction of a small, efficient camp. She had them gather wood for a signal fire, find a source of fresh water seeping from the cliffs, and build a lean-to to protect the injured Peterson from the elements. She worked alongside them, her actions setting the pace. There was no more debate, no more challenges. Her instructions were followed without question. Graves sat apart from the group, sullen and silent, cradling his still aching arm. He was an outcast, a leader who had failed at every conceivable level. The rest of the men, Miller included, treated Anya with a quiet deference that bordered on awe. They had never encountered a leader like her. She didn't rely on charisma or bluster. Her authority was a natural byproduct of her competence. Late in the afternoon, the distant thrum of a helicopter reached them. The signal fire, sending a thick plume of white smoke into the air, had done its job. A Navy Seahawk appeared over the cliffs, circled their position once, and settled into a low hover over the cove. A rescue swimmer descended on a hoist. The extraction was professional and efficient. Peterson was strapped into a litter and lifted first, followed by the others. Anya and Graves were the last 2 on the beach. As the hoist came down for her, she looked at Graves. He wouldn't meet her eye. He just stared at the ground, a man hollowed out by his own failure. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit debriefing room back at base, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The squadron's commanding officer, a stern-faced captain, sat at the head of a long table. Master Chief Thorne stood behind him, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The captain had read the preliminary reports. He had heard the garbled radio transmissions from Bravo boat, which had successfully weathered the storm and completed the mission. Now he wanted the story from Alpha boat. He started with Graves. As the designated boat commander, Graves spoke first. He tried to construct a narrative of heroism in the face of unforeseen disaster. He spoke of the sudden, unforecasted storm, the catastrophic and simultaneous equipment failure, and his valiant efforts to keep the crew safe. He painted Anya as a disruptive influence, questioning his authority at critical moments. His story was full of jargon and self-aggrandizement, but it was also riddled with inconsistencies. When he finished, the captain just looked at him, his silence more damning than any accusation. Then, he turned to Miller. "Candidate Miller, your report." Miller sat up straight. He looked at Graves, then at the captain, then at Anya. He took a deep breath. He recounted the events of the night with stark, factual clarity. He spoke of Anya's warning about the barometer. He described Graves freezing at the helm when the engine failed. He detailed Anya's calm, logical instructions that kept them from capsizing. He explained how she had organized the survivors on the beach, splinted Peterson's leg, and orchestrated their rescue. He finished by describing Graves's unprovoked assault on Anya and how she had neutralized him without causing serious injury. He left nothing out. When he was done, the room was silent. The captain looked at the other crew members. "Does anyone have a different version of events?" No one spoke. Their silence was a unanimous confirmation of Miller's account. The captain leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto Graves. Candidate Graves, your actions were not just a failure of leadership. They were a dereliction of duty that endangered the lives of every man on that boat. Your attempt to falsify a report to cover your own incompetence is an even greater failure of character. You are washed out. Pack your bags. You're done here. Graves' face went white. He opened his mouth to protest, but Thorne took one step forward, and the protest died in his throat. He slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. The captain dismissed the rest of the crew. Only Anya and Thorne remained. The captain looked at her, his expression softening slightly. Your report was consistent with the physical evidence and the testimony of the crew. You demonstrated exceptional leadership and skill under extreme duress. You saved the lives of 5 men. Anya simply nodded. I did what was necessary, sir. Thorne walked with her out of the debriefing room. They walked in silence down the long, quiet corridor. The sounds of the base were muffled, distant. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Anya was already compartmentalizing the event, filing it away, analyzing it for lessons learned. Her mind was already on the next evolution, the next challenge. Thorne finally broke the silence, his voice a low rumble. You know, the hardest part of this job isn't the water or the cold or the enemy. Anya glanced at him, waiting. It's the politics, he continued, his eyes fixed on the far end of the hallway. The ego. The men who think the trident is something you wear instead of something you are. They're the real danger. They're the ones who get people killed. He stopped outside the armory, the familiar smell of solvent and steel hanging in the air. Graves thought leadership was about being the loudest voice in the room. He never understood. Leadership is the quietest voice. It's the one that speaks when everyone else is shouting. It's the one that has the answer when the plan falls apart. He turned to face her directly. His sea ice eyes were clear, and for the first time, she saw unambiguous respect in them. Out there, on that boat, you were the leader. The rank didn't matter. The noise didn't matter. You had the answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a Sunto dive compass, a high-end precision instrument, far superior to the standard-issue model she carried. Its liquid-filled dome was crystal clear, the needle perfectly balanced. Your backup compass was damaged during the landing, he said. It wasn't a question. This one is better. It finds north, even when you're upside down. It was more than a gift. It was a symbol, a tool for a professional from a professional. It was an acknowledgement that she belonged. Anya took the compass. Its weight felt solid, reassuring in her hand. She looked at the finely marked bezel, the glowing cardinal points. Thank you, Master Chief, she said. He just gave a short, sharp nod. Don't lose it, he said, and then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hall until he was gone. Anya stood there for a moment, the compass in her palm. She looked at the reflection of the hallway lights on its glass face. She thought about the storm, the fear on the men's faces, the dead weight of Graves's arm after the strike. She thought about the perfect, silent logic of the bowline on a bight tied in the dark. All of it, the chaos and the order, were two sides of the same coin. The world was full of men like Graves, men who confused aggression with strength. They would always be there. But strength was not the power to break things. It was the discipline to hold them together when everything was falling apart. Strength is a responsibility, not a license.